Welcome to Read Poems Every Day. I've been reading A.R. Ammons' book, Briefings, published in 1971. And that led me to read a bit more about the poet and to read some poems from A Coast of Trees, which is a later collection published, I think, in the early 80s. This says copyright 1981. And so I thought maybe today I'd look at an Ammons poem. And here I came, on Poetry Foundation I came across one that does not appear, I don't think, in either of these collections, though I could be wrong about it. I don't remember coming across it when reading briefings, and I guess I didn't look at the table of contents of A Coast of Trees too closely. Anyway, it's a poem that Poetry Foundation credits as coming from a collection called The Really Short Poems of A.R. Ammons. I thought this might be a fun exercise to demonstrate how my process of studying poems um, also is pretty fruitful when looking at a poem that is incredibly minimalist. You might read this poem and think, well, what else is there? What else is there to say other than just what the poem says? What could I possibly say about a poem that is so short, has so few words? And I think those sorts of questions point us toward the need for a method of study, for something to do, for an activity, something that helps us engage with the text. And my sense is that my process of studying poems does just that. So let's read Ammon's poem and then run through, as many of the steps as I have time to run through today. It's possible I'll go through all of them. It's possible, given a recent video, maybe we'll spend all our time just counting things. Although I don't imagine that's going to be the case. All right, here it is: Substantial Planes by A.R. Ammons. After I uh, silence my devices. All right, Substantial Planes by A.R. Ammons. It doesn't matter to me if poems mean nothing. There's no floor to the universe, and yet one walks the floor. All right, I'm going to hide my bookmarks for now. Let's read it one more time. Let's read it one more time. Substantial Planes by A.R. Ammons. It doesn't matter to me if poems mean nothing. There's no floor to the universe, and yet one walks the floor. Great. Okay, so you have a number of two-line syllables. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 syllables. So this is a 14-line poem. 14, that's interesting. 14 lines, 7 stanzas, 7 two-line stanzas. Let's just make sure I have that right and highlight every fifth line. There's line 5, 6, 8. Here's line 10. Yes, okay. Perfect. Just wanted to double check my counting work there. There's something nice about a poem so minimalist. I can zoom in pretty far on this thing. All right, so 14 lines, 7 two-line stanzas. That might be too far though. It doesn't matter to me if poems mean nothing. Is there a line over 2 beats long? Universe, yes. So they're mostly 1 to 3 beats per line. No more than 2 words. Usually we don't count line length in words, but I think for this poem, given its layout, that I think that does matter. 14 lines, 7 two-line stanzas, 1 to 3 beats per line. Enjambment. Basically every line every line except line 6, which, where we get a colon at the end, and line 14. Okay. So every line isn't jammed. It doesn't matter to me if poems mean nothing. Pause. There's no floor to the universe, and yet one walks the floor. It's possible, there we could think of there is perhaps a silent punctuated pause, an unmarked punctuated pause at line 10, because those are two independent, I mean, mechanically speaking, those are two independent clauses there. There's no floor to the universe, comma, and yet one walks the floor. So it's possible there is that. So three of the 14 lines might have a pause there. So that means, 11 to 12 of the lines are in jammed. Punctuation. Speaking of punctuation, since I included the colon and the period there. So let's go back to the top. Apostrophe, line 1, line 7. Is that it? And there the apostrophe makes it possible for Ammons to sort of condense the line to fewer beats, fewer words. So instead of it does not, it doesn't. Apostrophe, we have the colon in line 6, and the period in line 14. I think that's it for punctuation. Looks like it. Okay. Pronouns. It. Although there the pronoun, I mean, it doesn't necessarily stand in for anything. It doesn't matter to me. It's a so all right. So but then we do have a me in line 3. And then a 1 in line 12. So that is interesting. We move from sort of third person ungendered pronoun it to first person singular me, the objective form of it, and then just the sort of general one. Yeah, one walks the floor. Okay. So we move from, yeah, third person without really an antecedent to first person, singular noun to a third person singular noun. Okay. So do I have thoughts about any of this? Bean counting? I don't know actually. 14 lines, 17 line stanzas. Um I will say the minimalist approach resonates with Ammons's sort of uh, typical punctuation style. And I'd say typical because I say typical as if I've known this for a long time. But Ammons is pretty well known for relying on just a few different punctuation marks, especially the colon in his work, but very very rarely uses commas. And so this fits with that. And so the additional features of the short lines and everything else kind of works together in that sense. Um, poem has two near halves, so a six line and 8 line halves. So we have the sense of a kind of Hmm. Uh, Maybe an opinion or statement, and then a clarifying, qualifying, amplifying statement. I have to think more about the relationship between those two halves. And in terms of the pronoun following the pronoun, we move from a personal statement, a preference or position to hmm, to its general warrant. That might be one way to put it. Sort of what warrants this statement, what's the kind of condition under which this speaker says what they say. Okay. All right. The extreme minimalism here too sort of echoes then the content, echoes the content, which is a statement about poetic meaning. Okay. So here, what I'm saying are these beans, these sort of like skeletal concerns about lineation and syntax, seem to line up with what at least initially appears to be the concerns of the poem and the speaker. Okay, so there's that sound and sense. Is there anything sound wise? Doesn't matter to me if poems mean nothing. So we do have those M sounds, right? Matter, me, mean. So that's lines 2, 3, and 5. And we have this sort of N sounds. Nothing, no, universe, and one. So yeah, so we have several instances there. So that's 6, 7, 10, 11, and 12. Any other sounds? It doesn't matter to. So we have the T sounds there at the beginning. T sounds. It doesn't matter to. So that's 1 through 3 that we have that sort of chain of alliteration. But I do have to say, like, I'm kind of digging a little bit to sort of catch these patterns, and I'm not so sure if they rise to the level of the kind of like standout alliterative patterns we see in other poetry. It doesn't matter to me if poems mean nothing. There's no floor to the universe, and yet one walks the floor. So there's a way in which the conversational tone and rhythm kind of masks these sonic features. They don't come across as intentionally alliterative. Is there such thing as kind of everyday alliteration, right? Because I think we alliteration is usually a technique that really stands out because it seems sort of self-consciously patterned, sort of like rhyme in that way. That this is one thing that these kind of schemas allow the poem to do is to differentiate its way of phrasing and wording things, differentiating that from everyday speech, right? But here, that gap is kind of closed, and so we might say that the minimalism then also extends itself to the sound system of the poem itself. Hmm. Okay. And also the frequent enjambment gives the gives gives the poem let's say a speed, the frequent enjambment plus the brevity of the verse gives the poem a kind of speed. You can read it in just a few seconds. It doesn't matter to me if poems mean nothing. There's no floor to the universe, and yet one walks the floor, right? Like it that, and then it's over. Okay, so what about the sense of the poem? Let's say part one, so lines 1 through 6. A negative statement, a possible negation of poem's significance. And by negative statement, though, I just mean it uses a not, right? Not that it takes a you know sort of antagonistic stance. The antagonism would be the antagonism here is not to poetry, but to those who would complain that a poem uh, means nothing. So the two negatives cancel out as a position that is in implied support of poetic projects. But the stanza leaves unanswered. Hmm, where the value of a poem comes in, right? Like what position then we take with respect to poetry? Okay, so then in part two, it doesn't matter to me. One other thing, maybe. We have a reference to both a kind of mattering. It doesn't matter to me if poems mean nothing. Is there something there? Maybe we'll save that for a later point. Okay, so the second part then, there's no floor to the universe. A real big time zoom out. Um, go from a poem to the universe. Kind of grounds poetry, so to speak, in the groundlessness of existence itself. There is a kind of complex figure here. Analogy happens here between poetry and the universe, but also between poem reader or writer and universe, um, kind of us, maybe. But then also a metaphor of sorts um, between a room's floor and the universe's grounding. Also, hmm, part of this entails a metonymy. Is that what I'm saying? Between metonymy or analogy. I wonder why I'm thinking metonymy. Maybe because of association. We'll worry about that if we get to form and figures, although we're at 20 minutes, so I kind of doubt we will. So we'll maybe have to take this as an anticipation of what we would have to wrestle with there. Part of this entails metonymy or analogy between walking and being or living, right? There's no floor, and yet one walks the floor, right? I mean, that's great. There's no floor to the universe, and yet one walks the floor. Is the floor the material floor? Back to matter? Um, or an insistence on the universe having the floor it doesn't really have? Is the floor provided or made or extended by the walking? I'm probably sounding a little crazy, but I hope in just sort of stepping out some of those questions, you're starting to see how even a poem this short, this minimalist, is starting to really um, raise some questions and ideas that we could run with later on. And really, all we're being prompted by are the words that Ammons has chosen here and the rippling implications of the proximity of matter and meaning, which kind of maybe parallels the relationship between the floor and the floor here. Hmm. What do we make of that? The title. Substantial planes. Hmm. What does the title refer to? Floors? Existential floors? Existential or cosmic floors? Maybe poems? And so, what might we say about the analogy that Ammons is saying here? It doesn't matter to me if poems mean nothing. It's not as simple as saying because they still mean something. Hmm. Maybe it's a version of that old saying, right? That poem shouldn't mean but be, and there does seem to be something moving us in that direction. And maybe there's a way in which this exercise that I'm working out is actually illustrating what the poem itself is saying. That to some degree, you know, someone who would want to press and insist that this poem doesn't mean anything. Look at it. There's nothing here. You could say, like, okay. And there's a way in which my very approach to the poem sort of shrugs and says, it's very possible that it doesn't mean anything. That doesn't matter to me because I'm going to walk the floor anyway. And suddenly you have all these notes. Having just done a little bit of listening, a little bit of counting, and a little bit of anticipating these these later steps. Well, thanks for spending time with Ammons and with me today, for joining me in this little experiment to see what it would look like to study a minimalist poem using this method. Quite interesting what we found out. Okay, let's read more poems tomorrow.